The next method that we'll be working on is the horizontal win method. Should start around line 33 in the game class. Okay, and so the trick to this method is that we want to check every square plus 3, right? So like we want to start on this square and go to this square. Or we want to start on this square and check up to this square. Or we want to check on this square and check all the, 3 next to it and see if they're all the same color. But the problem is, what if we start on this square and we check the next 3? Well, we're going to go out of bounds. And the computer is going to crash because it's going to be like, no, there's no column over here for you to check. So your loops have to take that into account. And they have to you have to work with your loops to prevent you from going out of bounds. So if we're going to check from here over to here, but we want to do this column last, we want to start here last, we don't ever want to start our method on this column because we will go out of bounds. This column, we will go to this column, we will go out of bounds. So our loops have to reflect that. And that's what you have to kind of be careful about here. So the first thing, again, is that we're going to want to, just like the clearboard method, write loops to iterate over each, over the rows, a loop to iterate over the rows, a nested loop to iterate over column indexes, and then finally we want to check the 3 addition, check for 4 in a row. So let's start doing these things. So pause right now and don't look back at other code and try and write a loop to iterate over all the rows in the board array. It's a two-dimensional array of integers called board. So I'm going to just use for loops here because it's kind of the most common. For int row, row index equals 0. And you should have paused and tried to do this on your own. We want this loop to continue as long as row index is less than board.length. And then every time through our loop, we want the row index value to be increased or incremented by 1. Now, is this the loop that we need to be careful about, or is the column loop the one we need to be careful about? Because we haven't adjusted for that idea of the necessity of restraining ourselves such that we don't go out of bounds. So here I'll bring up the picture again, and we'll eventually kind of think about it. But not actually right now, so let me minimize it. Let's just write a loop to look at every column, and then we're going to adjust the loops. So now we need to do this one inside our row loop. So why don't you pause right now and try and write a for loop or a while loop or whichever to iterate over each index of the rows. So you should have paused it. I'm going to continue now. For int col index, starting at the first column, we want to continue as long as col index is less than the length of a row. And then each time we want to increment our col index by 1. Now, like I said, I'm not going to adjust these loops to stay in bounds quite yet. Well, actually, let's do it right now. So we have our 2 loops that will look at every single row and every single column, or iterate over each of those things. So right now, if we tried to check, we would check, well, let's not actually do this quite yet. Let's write our checks. So at each index, we want to check that item plus the 3 to its right. That's going to be my strategy. You can do it from the left or whatever, but this is, I think, the easiest strategy. So we have to have a counter variable, so let's just do red first. we need to count, right? If there are 4 reds in a row. So let's have a counter variable. And we'll start it at 0. And we actually want this to be inside this loop because we want it to reset every time we start doing another check. So red count equals 0. So let's just check for red. So if board at row index call index equals red, we want to increment the red count variable so that we can keep track of that. And then we want to check the items 3 to its right. So we'll do that 3 more times, so 4 times. Starting at, say, this one. So this is the row, and this is the next column over, the next column over, the next column over. That would be, if those 4 were red, a red win. So we want to check the column index plus 1, the column index plus 2, and the column index plus 3. And then if we have found that there are in fact 4 reds originating from that point, we need to flip the value of result to true so that we can communicate, yes, we have found a red win. Okay, so what now do we have to do to our loops to make sure that we don't go out of bounds? Because if I run this program now and I am checking for wins, it will crash. And it will crash very early on because it's constantly going to be checking for wins. So it already crashed. Good. It said array index out of bounds exception 7. And it did it right here because this one is the first line that will go out of bounds every time. Well, so if we're checking for the current column index plus 3, which loop do you think we need to adjust such that we have room? The row index loop or the column index loop? Pause and try and make the adjustment, and then I'm going to continue right now. And the adjustment that we have to make is that we have to stop our loop 3 items early because we need 3 spaces to the right of wherever we are, otherwise we'll go out of bounds. So we need to stop it 3 from the end, or with 3 additional spaces, right? That's what this -3 is. Okay, so now if we do this, it should actually detect red wins, horizontal wins, if the computer will behave so that I can, yep, red wins, play again, yes or no, we'll play again. All right, so that method works. Now your job is to duplicate it for yellow, and you can just do it inside this loop. You don't have to write more loops, or you could write more loops. Actually, why don't you just write more loops down here below to check for the yellow ones. And that is all for the horizontal win method.